Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to welcome everyone in this presentation. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sartanto Ibo. I'm the president of the US chapter of PII. So I would like to thank the presenters for participating in this webinar. And I would also encourage you, if you're an Indonesian engineers in the United States, to join our group. And there will be a link to sign up to our group after the webinar. And to start the presentation, I would like to invite Mr. Bambang Gritno as the Secretary General of PII to give his introductory speech. Mr. Bambang Gritno.
Terima kasih. Selamat pagi, selamat malam untuk teman-teman yang sedang berada di Amerika Serikat. Dan selamat bertemu kembali dengan kami. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semuanya. Saya hari ini diberi tugas oleh Pak Danis, Ketua Umum PII, untuk menyampaikan salam dan juga menyampaikan sambutan pembukaan pada seminar nasional PII Chapter Amerika Serikat tentang yang mengambil tema atau topik Decarbonization and Energy Transition, Exploring Science, Innovation and Policy in the USA dan Indonesia. Pertama-tama tentu kita panjatkan syukur kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa yang memberikan kesehatan kepada kita sehingga kita bersama-sama bisa bertemu lagi di forum ini dalam keadaan sehat walafiat untuk pertama kalinya dengan Persatuan Insinyur Indonesia Chapter Amerika Serikat ya. Seminar ini mengelaborasi penyediaan energi secara umum dan transisi energi dengan tema Decarbonization and Energy Transition, Exploring Science, Innovation, and Policy in the USA and Indonesia. Yang kami hormati para pengurus dan anggota PII, Bapak Ibu, serta para saudara-saudara, para insinyur, pembicara, moderator, webinar yang saya banggakan. Pemerintah Indonesia telah membuat komitmen yang menggembirakan di bawah perjanjian COP21 Paris, di mana Indonesia berkomitmen mengurangi emisinya tanpa syarat setidaknya 29% terhadap skenario business as usual 2010 pada tahun 2030 dan pengurangan emisi 41% tunduk pada dukungan dari kerjasama internasional dengan target menjadi net zero pada tahun 2060. Komitmen senada di COP26 Glasgow bulan November 2021 yang lalu, Indonesia akan berkontribusi dalam percepatan perwujudan global net zero emission. Hal yang sama disampaikan dalam Conference of Parties atau COP21 di Mesir, di mana Bapak Wakil Presiden Ma'ruf Amin menyampaikan komitmen Indonesia dalam mengatasi dampak perubahan iklim yang semakin memprihatinkan. Hadirin sekalian, para pembicara, peserta, dan seluruh insinyur yang sangat kami banggakan, kita melihat bahwa sudah banyak seruan dan juga ambisi di sektor energi ini yang tentunya hanya dapat dicapai melalui kebijakan dan regulasi yang lebih baik. Akses ke fasilitas pembiayaan domestik dan internasional, penggunaan dan penguasaan teknologi yang tepat, dan penyediaan sumber daya manusia, termasuk sumber daya insinyur yang capable untuk bisa mensukseskan sektor energi ini. Penyediaan sumber energi masa depan termasuk transisi ke sumber energi terbarukan yang lebih murah, lebih bersih, dalam bauran pasokan energi dapat ditingkatkan dengan memberikan insentif kepada industri dan masyarakat untuk menggunakan sumber energi terbarukan, mengganti bahan baku industri dengan yang dihasilkan dari sumber energi terbarukan, dan penggunaan energi terbarukan dalam transportasi, agar pemerintah dapat memenuhi kebutuhannya, yakni komitmen pengurangan karbon. Hadirin pembicara yang terhormat dan peserta yang sangat saya banggakan, energi baru terbarukan sebagai alternatif yang layak untuk memenuhi kebutuhan energi dari industri-industri di Indonesia mengkonsumsi 36% dari total energi di Indonesia. EBT dapat menjadi cost effective ways untuk memenuhi kebutuhan listrik dan menghasilkan listrik dengan menggantikan sumber berbasis bahan bakar fosil. Hidrogen bisa menjadi alternatif yang layak dalam industri seperti produksi pupuk, petrochemical, dan beberapa industri proses berat lainnya yang saat ini sepenuhnya tergantung pada gas alam atau batu bara. Energi panas bumi, hydro, wind, dan sumber EBT lainnya dapat memberikan jalan ke depan untuk memungkinkan industri tersebut beralih ke EBT. Dan dengan demikian berkontribusi secara signifikan terhadap pengurangan emisi. Peran dan kontribusi insinyur Indonesia sangatlah signifikan di era transisi energi ini, di mana anggota dan pengurus PI yang berperan di sektor ini dalam kapasitasnya sebagai developer dan pelaku industri, pemerintah, akademisi, periset, dan masyarakat umum. Transisi energi adalah jalan menuju transformasi sektor energi global dari berbasis fosil menjadi nol karbon pada paruh kedua abad ini. Inti dari transisi energi adalah kebutuhan untuk mengurangi emisi CO2 terkait energi untuk membatasi perubahan iklim. Yang menjadi kata kunci adalah decarbonization, net zero roadmap, CO2 emissions reductions, new and renewable energy. Transisi energi berkeadilan dan terjangkau menjadi topik yang sangat hangat saat ini diperbincangkan di forum-forum nasional maupun internasional. Sudah menjadi cita-cita kita bahwa transisi yang adil dan terjangkau dari sektor energi berarti memastikan bahwa biaya dan manfaat dari dunia yang dielektrifikasi menjadi dengan energi terbarukan betul-betul bisa didistribusikan secara adil dan dengan harga yang terjangkau. Dalam perspektif ini, PI Just Energy Transition juga bisa berarti bahwa para insinyur Indonesia bisa mengambil bagian dalam pengembangan program transisi energi di Indonesia. Betul-betul memanfaatkan tenaga ahli keinsinyuran kita dan kemampuan Indonesia di berbagai lini dan profesi. Dengan berkembangnya berbagai proyek EBT baru di Indonesia, akan ada keahlian baru yang dibutuhkan untuk memenuhi berbagai aspek pengembangan energi terbarukan untuk seperti pengembangan proyek rekayasa keuangan, desain, konstruksi, commissioning, dan O&M. Karena itu, kita perlu memastikan bahwa para insinyur Indonesia kita mengambil bagian yang signifikan dan tidak tertinggal hanya untuk menonton meskipun proyek-proyek bernilai jutaan dolar ini berada di halaman belakang kita sendiri. Bapak dan Ibu, saudara-saudara sekalian, para insinyur, pembicara, moderator, dan seluruh hadirin yang saya banggakan, kami mencatat ada beberapa tujuan yang ingin dicapai pada webinar ini. Antara lain, satu, untuk memberikan gambaran menyeluruh tentang yang terbaru, penelitian dan inovasi terkait upaya transisi energi secara global. Dua, webinar ini juga akan memfasilitasi pertukaran pengetahuan dan inovasi antara Amerika Serikat dan Indonesia, terutama dengan pembicara yang berada di lini depan, masyarakat umum, dan juga upaya-upaya pemerintah. Ketiga, peserta akan mendapatkan beragam perspektif tentang tantangan dan peluang dekarbonisasi dalam konteks yang berbeda. dan mengakui pentingnya sains, kebijakan, dan inovasi teknik dalam mendorong transisi ke sistem energi yang berkelanjutan. Keempat, seminar ini bertujuan untuk melibatkan berbagai peserta, termasuk praktisi teknik, akademisi, dan pembuat keputusan di Indonesia, memanfaatkan wawasan dan praktek terbaik dari pengalaman Amerika dalam transisi energi. Dan kelima, acara ini akan menjadi kesempatan untuk memperkenalkan PII Chapter Amerika Serikat kepada masyarakat umum dan mendapatkan keanggotaan dari para insinyur Indonesia yang berada di Amerika Serikat. Bapak dan Ibu serta saudara-saudara para insinyur, pembicara, moderator, dan seminar yang saya banggakan. Izinkan saya menyampaikan bahwa sebagai bagian dari keluarga besar PII, kita patut berbangga bahwa selama 16 bulan terakhir ini, kepengurusan PII, animo para sarjana teknik dan hayati untuk menjadi bagian dari keanggotaan PII semakin meningkat. Pada kesempatan ini, izinkan saya berterima kasih kepada PLN, PT PLN Persero, yang merupakan pelaku utama di sektor energi dan tenaga listrikan yang telah mendaftarkan lebih dari 14.000 stafnya yang berlatar belakang sarjana teknik, sehingga menambah total keanggotaan PII menjadi kurang lebih 80.000 anggota. Kami juga mencatat terjadi peningkatan jumlah insinyur profesional menjadi 25.000 insinyur profesional dan telah terbentuknya PII perwakilan luar negeri di Singapura, Malaysia, Amerika Serikat, Kuwait, dan akan segera disusul oleh negara-negara lainnya, di mana insinyur kita bekerja dan berpraktek. Finalisasi Mutual Recognition Arrangement on Professional Engineering Services antara Engineers Australia dan PII. Upaya-upaya yang dilakukan oleh pengurus PII di pusat hingga ke wilayah dan cabang-cabang. Badan kejuruan dan badan pelaksana atau badan tetap tidak lain adalah dalam rangka memberikan akses seluas-luasnya kepada para insinyur Indonesia untuk meningkatkan kompetensinya dan mendapatkan pengakuan kesetaraan di tingkat nasional maupun internasional. Sehingga insinyur kita bisa memberikan nilai tambah bagi pembangunan nasional dan berdaya saing global. Akhir kata, semoga Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa senantiasa membimbing dan melindungi kita semua dalam mewujudkan cita-cita kita bersama. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih sebesar-besarnya kepada semua pihak, penyelenggara, dan khususnya PII Amerika Serikat yang telah sangat aktif mendukung atau menyelenggarakan acara ini dengan sangat baik. Selamat mengikuti seminar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Bambang Guritno, for your opening remarks. So in his remarks, he has expressed the relevance of this webinar topics into the context of Indonesian perspective. So I really thank you for your remarks. So the next speaker is Mr. Triharyo Indrawan Susilo. He is the Special Advisor to Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources for acceleration of infrastructure development and investment. So he will give a short keynote speech. So Mr. Susilo.
Okay, thank you, Pak Artanto from PII USA, also Pak Bambang Guritno, Secretary General of PII, and also all the members of PII. Speaker from Berkeley, Professor Daniel Kemen, and also colleagues from Berkeley, Professor Sri Siharan from Iowa State University, and also Pak Febi Tumiwa, Chairman of IESR, and all the participants of this online. It's getting bigger, 143. Congratulations to PII. Thank you for inviting me, and apology that my minister cannot join this morning because of his engagement. So today I'd like to present to you the energy transition, particularly the net zero emission target of 2060. So if I may, can I share my presentation? So let me share. Okay, can you see everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so basically, this presentation is going going process. Is still under continued development in our ministry. I would like to inform you the energy sector NZE by 2060, and the three biggest contributors, i.e., electricity sector, energy efficiency and energy conservation, and one of the last and not least is the carbon capture and storage. So I think everyone already knows the Indonesia nationally determined contribution target is the table on the left. Yeah, the table on the left shows that we are targeting a reduction of 1.1 billion, 1,000 million CO2 reductions, CO2 emission reduction. So out of that, there are two tables. One is CM1 and one is CM2. Yeah, CM1 means countermeasure 1 and CM2 means countermeasure 2. So the numbers you can see, CM1 is 9,115, the total on the left, and then the right one, CM2, is 1,240. This is in million tons, so 1 billion, 1.2 billion. Yeah, so if you can see the numbers, the energy sector is the biggest. Okay, the biggest is energy sector, 358 million or 446. So 358 million is our ministry number. So we have to achieve this in 2060, 358 million. I'll explain to you how do you achieve that. The graph to reduce is on the right. By today until 2060, our target is that reduction, together with others ministry, i.e. forestry and others. Yeah, Polu means forestry. So how do we achieve this in our ministry? So in our ministry, we have 4 axes. We call it 4 axes. Yeah. One of the biggest axes is energy efficiency. The left one, the blue color energy efficiency axis is 132 million ton per year reduction. And this, if you can see, it's the household energy efficiency, 83.8 million. This is the biggest, one of the biggest. And then the second axis, we call the renewable energy power generation and replacement of coal. This is 181.4 million ton, yeah, renewable energy generation. And then cleaner coal technology, this is not our major efforts, but we have to reduce slowly, i.e. by cleaner coal technology in existing coal power plants and also in transportation. So these are what we call the NDC or enhanced NDC. If you remember the number before in the presentation, just one page before, 358 million. Then we are now make it NDC, enhanced NDC 379. So that's the target. So please look at the 4 axes. This is NDC, but also note the red color. The red color is our new additional effort to reduce CO2, the oil and gas sector. This is not NDC. Yeah? This is a new, and this is one of the one that we also are making efforts on this one. So let's go one by one. Now let's go to net zero emission in electricity sector. If you can see the planning for power generation, there are many yellow color. The yellow color is very big. So, and then also is the hydro. Yeah. So actually we rely significantly on solar and also hydro. Yeah, you can see the numbers on the left. Yeah, then other than power generation, because Java Island is very populated, but very limited in energy renewable, we have to bring renewable energy, i.e. from North Kalimantan to Java, and also from Nusa Tenggara. So there are now development of inter-island transmission to send energy from, for example, Kayan hydropower plants or from solar panel in Nusa Tenggara to the populated area in Bali and Java. So these two has to be understood as a parallel efforts to replace coal with renewable energy. Yeah. Then I'd like to inform you in rather detail what are the renewable energy. These are the numbers. These are the tons of CO2. I do not want to go one by one, and these are the targets. Yeah. Look at the table on the left. Yeah, there is what we call large hydropower projects. Yeah, large hydropower projects is one of the biggest reliance of renewable energy. If you look on the right, the 21 giga or 20.9 giga, half of that is large hydro PP, means hydropower plant. 9.2 is the large hydropower plants. What does that mean? That means we are planning to generate hydropower plants significantly outside Java. Where is that? Maybe you read the news. We are now promoting a North Kalimantan hydropower plants. There are two projects there. One is Kayan Hydro Energy and Kayan Hydro Nusantara. Kayan Hydro Energy is 9,000 megawatt. Kayan Hydro Nusantara is 5,000 megawatt. So it's a 14,000 megawatt in North Kalimantan, and targeting the green energy industries, also the capital city of in Indonesia, new capital city. So these are some of the highlights of the renewable energy. Having said that, in the past, renewable energy is always negotiated one by one, i.e. if you have a PPA with PLN, you negotiate with the PLN and then get approval from Ministry of Energy. Ministry said, no, this is too time consuming. So today, a presidential decree already issued, number 112 last year, which puts the tariff of each renewable energy, ceiling tariff, yeah, of course, for each category of renewable energy. What does that mean? That means simplified decision on the investment of renewable energy. So these are the numbers. I do not want to go one by one, but it's official. It's a presidential decree. So that's electricity. Now, energy efficiency and energy conservation. This is also a big contributor. You can see on the left, it's 83.8 million ton for energy efficiency, and totally 132. So energy efficiency is similar in number to renewable energy. So what is that? Yeah, that means this. So if you look at the table on the right, there are many efforts which could be done to reach 83.8 million. So let me go back a little bit. 83.8 million is consisting of these numbers. Changing television to lower energy efficiency, changing air conditioning to lower energy efficiency, to more energy efficiency, lower. The biggest is, of course, air conditioning. Yeah, Indonesia, if you know or may not know, we use HVAC, which is not efficient. HVAC is heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. We do not use variable regulated air conditioning. So if we are promoting energy efficient, one of the biggest target is government buildings, state or enterprise buildings, and so on and so forth, yeah, office buildings, to more energy efficient buildings. The investment from such efficiency could reduce the emission of CO2, yeah. So that's that. Then this is one of our baby now, one of our strong push to utilize our Indonesian resource. So again, on the right is the carbon capture storage efforts. Please look at the statement on the bottom of the red box. It says voluntary carbon market. It's a very important word, yeah, voluntary carbon market. In the left, energy efficiency, renewable energy, cleaner coal energy, lower CO2 emission in fuel of transportation is NDC, nationally determined contribution. We could not sell if this target is not achieved. Yeah, so This is a mandatory target. But if there is efficiency more than the target, then you can sell the carbon emission reduction credit. But on the right, the red box is a voluntary carbon market, means it could be sold directly to the market. Okay, so that's one interesting subject. But the project itself is so many today in Indonesia, and I'll tell you why. So today there are green projects on the bottom called Gundi and Sukawati. This project is already approved by METI, Ministry of Energy, Trade and Industry of Japan, and already completed feasibility study and ready to sell the carbon emission reduction credit. There are two projects, the numbers are on the right. And then there are a purple project. These are major projects. In Tangguh, in BP, there is a UCC project, Ubadari, compression and carbon capture. And also there is, of course, the Abadi project in Masela, which is also necessity to inject CO2 to the ground. So CO2 injection to the ground, to the storage is mandatory from stakeholder concern. So shareholders, lenders, everybody said, no, you cannot use CO2 emission to the air. You have to implement CO2 injection to the ground. So that's why if we could make this a voluntary carbon market, it adds value. It provides revenue to Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Energy, and also Indonesian government, and also the corporation. So I like to share with you this important chart. What is this circle means? Yeah, Indonesia in the past, we rely on natural resources. The Suharto era, we rely on oil and gas exports. Today, Pak Jokowi rely on coal export, on mineral export, on CPO export, on forestry product export. So we rely on natural resources as our revenue and devisa. But in the future, the natural resources of Indonesia, which are currently being developed, is the capacity to store CO2 in the ground. We are one of the biggest in the world. Look at the numbers on the right. Our internal ministry said maybe 9 to 11, but Rystad Energy, ExxonMobil said we have 80 gigaton. What does that mean, Pak Hengki? What does that mean? This is a game changer. A major oil and gas company will move their petrochemical project from USA to Cilegon, West Java, because they can inject the CO2 in Asri Basin. Asri Basin is north of Banten. Because of that storage capacity, the CO2 can be stored in Indonesia. Petrochemical plant in Singapore may be difficult. They have to send pipe CO2 to Indonesia. But we can develop industry, petrochemical industries and other industry where CO2 can be injected to the ground because of our natural resources. We call the saline aquifer. Please remember those words. It will be the future of Indonesia, like oil and gas in the past, like coal and mineral today. Okay. Now, I'd like to share 3 pages of this carbon market, yeah, which is the presentation from IDX. Today, IDX and many parties in the government, IDX is Jakarta Stock Exchange, sorry for not knowing this. So there is a project developer which will sell CO2 emission reduction, and there is carbon emitters which have to pay to buy CO2 reduction credit, yeah. So as I mentioned to you, there is a compliance, NDC we call it, National Deposit Contribution, and there is an excess, then you can sell. But there is also voluntary market. For example, the CCS market. Yeah. Then today, IDX, Jakarta Stock Exchange, is preparing all documentation, i.e. OJK, i.e. KSII, and so on and so on and so forth. They will be ready. They will be ready. by July, August, to sell carbon reduction credit, but they will sell on the secondary market. So look at the IDX chart, regulated over-the-counter platform, OTC. To the bottom, they will take care. But on the top, development of CO2 reduction is by primary market, means us, means Ministry of Energy, means our stakeholders, the oil and gas companies, means the related institution. Yeah. So we prepare the credits to be sold to the market and register or put in the OTC of IDX, over the counter of IDX. Okay. Now, this is different with IDX IPO. IDX IPO, they come into the primary market. They provided prospectus, they provided due diligence, they do this and that. So, but in carbon market, they will be in the secondary market. Yeah. So means the pressure on our ministry and the developer is much bigger than putting IPO on the public for companies. So that's why today our effort is we try to find a way where our carbon emission reduction in CCS, for example, is verified by international standards and could be sold in the market. One of the biggest one is we call it Vera standard. We will use Vera. Vera is now coming next week. We will be providing arrangement to develop what we call the methodology to issue certificate of reduction of emission to be sold in Jakarta Stock Exchange. Who will prepare this? Badan Standarisasi Nasional, the institution that developed SNI. SNI is Standard Nasional Indonesia, and then registered and supported by Ministry of Environment. So that's that. In summary, I like to inform everyone in this room, in this session, that we have five major development in energy transition, and I will put the presentation in the chat group. One is renewable energy power plants, welcome. A new technology in geothermal, welcome. A new technology in solar panel, welcome. New technology in hydrogen production, welcome. Also inter-island. Today, Indonesian islands are separated in power generation. So we have to interconnect between the islands. And then number three is the efficiency and energy conservation projects, particularly buildings, i.e. government building, state-owned enterprise building, office building is very inefficient. You see the numbers, particularly air conditioning. Number four is carbon capture and storage project. This is billions and billions of dollar project in Indonesia now. We cannot wait because otherwise oil and gas will not be developed or produced. And finally, to all of you here, our ministry working with other ministry is pushing very hard for the development of carbon market trading so that revenue and investment can come through openly through Jakarta Stock Exchange to reduce energy consumption and CO2 emission reduction. With that, thank you so much for inviting me and welcome if there's any question. Thank you. Silakan Pak Habibie atau Pak. Saya kembalikan ke Pak Hartanto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Susila. So we will take the questions for the keynote speeches after the second speaker, but it will be very quick. But I hope that you can still stick around until the end of the webinar, because the three main speakers that we have would have a lot of suggestions for Indonesia. So I hope that you are here to hear their suggestions. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Rida Yasser. He is the Assistant Deputy of Energy in the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs. So if you are around, I would like to invite you to deliver your keynote speech. Dr. Rida Yasser.
Ya, oke. Maaf, Pak Rida saat ini berhalangan, jadi keynote speech yang ditujukan kepada Pak Menko akan kami sampaikan. Thank you for inviting our minister as a keynote speaker in this webinar. We apologize that our minister has another agenda, so he asked us to deliver his speech. My name is Trinaldine Baho. I am as a Deputy Director for Energy in Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment. Okay, I will read the keynote in Bahasa. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera, salam swastiastu, namo buddhaya, kebajikan. Yang terhormat Ketua Umum Persatuan Insinyur Indonesia Bapak Danis Hidayat Sumadilaga dan pengurus pusat PI lainnya. Yang terhormat para pembicara atau narasumber, Profesor dan Kaman dari UC Berkeley, Profesor Sri Hara dari Iowa State University, dan Bapak Febi Tumewa dari Institute for Essential Service Reform. Juga tadi ada Pak Hengkia dari Kementerian SDM. Yang terhormat para peserta webinar Decarbonization and Energy Transition, Exploring Science, Innovation and Policy in the USA and Indonesia. Pertama-tama izinkan saya menyampaikan apresiasi kepada penyelenggara webinar internasional ini yang telah memilih topik dan timing yang tepat bagi kita semua untuk berkontribusi pada gerakan transisi energi di Indonesia dengan target umum pencapaian net zero emission pada tahun 2060 atau lebih cepat. Pertanyaannya adalah, transisi energi seperti apa yang kita inginkan, yang akan memberi manfaat sosial, manfaat lingkungan, dan manfaat ekonomi terbesar bagi Indonesia. Indonesia dengan 17.500 pulau adalah negara kepulauan terbesar di dunia. Kaya akan sumber daya alam dan energi dari yang berbasis fosil, sumber energi terbarukan yang tidak terbatas, hingga cadangan energi transition minerals yang berlimpah. Indonesia mempunyai modal yang lebih dari cukup untuk bersiap menjadi negara maju dan turut berkontribusi secara global pada gerakan transisi energi. Dengan pertimbangan dan pemilihan yang baik, skema pemanfaatan kekayaan sumber daya alam Indonesia untuk mendukung gerakan transisi energi secara bersamaan juga dapat membukakan peluang bagi Indonesia untuk keluar dari the middle income trap dan menjadi negara maju melalui skema pencapaian target net zero emission pada tahun 2060 atau lebih cepat. Indonesia telah menyatakan komitmennya dengan menurunkan emisi karbon melalui NDC yang bahkan sudah ditingkatkan menjadi enhanced NDC dengan target penurunan emisi karbon sebesar 31,89% hingga 2030 melalui usaha sendiri atau hingga 43,2% dengan dukungan internasional. Namun demikian, dalam penerapan dan usaha pencapaian transisi energi dan net zero emission, tetap perlu disadari bahwa Indonesia masih harus terus membangun dan mengembangkan perekonomiannya sesuai dengan kemampuan dan modal sumber daya yang dimiliki tanpa mengurangi stabilitas dan ketahanan energi serta pertumbuhan perekonomian nasional. Dengan memahami kenyataan bahwa tingkat emisi per kapita Indonesia masih jauh di bawah global average, seharusnya proses dan skema-skema pencapaian transisi energi menuju net zero emission di Indonesia dapat dijalankan tanpa mengganggu pertumbuhan perekonomian nasional, bahkan seharusnya dapat diandalkan untuk membawa perekonomian Indonesia keluar dari the middle income trap. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, kunci bagi Indonesia untuk melepaskan diri dari the middle income trap adalah dengan meningkatkan daya saing melalui inovasi yang dapat dilakukan melalui penguasaan berbagai teknologi untuk melakukan hilirisasi pengolahan beragam sumber daya alam bernilai tinggi yang berlimpah jumlahnya di Indonesia. Data BPS untuk tahun 2022 menunjukkan income per kapita Indonesia berkisar pada sekitar 4.783 US dollar, yang berarti Indonesia sudah melampaui lower middle income country dan sudah mencapai status sebagai upper middle income country. Walaupun dalam hal ini Indonesia belum selesai mengoptimalkan efisiensi di berbagai sektor, termasuk di sektor energi, yang seharusnya sudah diselesaikan untuk melepaskan status sebagai lower middle income country. Lalu untuk mencapai status sebagai negara dengan high income per kapita, yang berarti berhasil keluar dari the middle income trap. Indonesia masih harus meningkatkan income per kapita hampir 3 kali lipat. Sebagai contoh, dalam memproduksi solar panel untuk proyek PLTS berskala 330 MW peak, total benefit yang dapat diperoleh adalah 343 miliar US dollar. Kenyataan yang terjadi selama ini lebih dari 10 tahun ke belakang adalah Indonesia hanya melakukan assembling solar panel pada step terakhir dengan skala benefit 5 US million dollar dari total 343 miliar US dollar lagi. Baru belakangan ini manufacturing solar cell mulai dilakukan di Indonesia dengan skala benefit dalam contoh proyek ini akan mencapai 55 miliar US dollar dari total 343 US dollar. Jadi bila Indonesia dapat mendatangkan keseluruhan teknologi manufacturing solar panel sejak dari hulunya, yaitu sejak proses pemurnian bahan mentah pasir silika, total benefit 343 US million tadi, pada contoh ya, barulah total benefit yang sedemikian ini yang dapat menghantarkan Indonesia keluar dari the middle income trap. Dan bila kita cermati lebih lanjut, target pengembangan sistem PLTS hingga tahun 2060 yang mencapai 708 gigawatt peak, seharusnya tidak sedikit pemilik teknologi yang tertarik untuk berinvestasi mendatangkan teknologi yang mereka miliki untuk berproduksi di Indonesia. Jadi kami tekankan kembali lagi untuk berinvestasi mendatangkan teknologi yang mereka miliki untuk berproduksi di Indonesia. Berikutnya sebagai contoh lain yang sejalan adalah pengembangan end-to-end electric vehicle value chain yang juga melibatkan adopsi teknologi dari berbagai global players di banyak segmen. Bila berbagai contoh pengadopsian teknologi seperti yang sudah kami sebutkan dapat dilakukan juga dalam mengembangkan berbagai macam teknologi energi terbarukan seperti pengembangan manufaktur komponen sistem pembangkit listrik geothermal atau PLTP, dan juga pengembangan manufaktur komponen PLTA, pengembangan manufaktur komponen PLTB ya, nanti juga akan dipaparkan oleh salah satu narasumber dari US State University, serta berbagai macam pengembangan manufaktur pembangkit energi terbaru lainnya. Maka Indonesia akan dapat mencapai status high income per kapita, sejalan dengan pencapaian target transisi energi untuk mencapai net zero emission tahun 2060. Jadi dukungan asing berupa green investment semacam ini pula lah yang terbaik bagi Indonesia dalam meningkatkan NDC-nya dari 31,89% menjadi 43,2% melalui international support. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, tidak kalah pentingnya dalam pembahasan transisi energi adalah peran sumber daya energi lainnya seperti natural gas yang akan menjadi pilihan energi utama selama masa transisi ke depan karena menghasilkan emisi yang relatif rendah dalam pemanfaatannya. Tadi sudah banyak disinggung oleh Pak Engking dari Kementerian SDM. Data Kementerian SDM menunjukkan bahwa konsumsi gas di dalam negeri juga akan meningkat selama periode 2020 sampai 2040. Presiden Joko Widodo lebih lanjut juga sudah memberikan arahan untuk mengoptimalkan pemanfaatan serta hilirisasi pengolahan natural gas di dalam negeri. Optimalisasi pemanfaatan natural gas pada skala besar akan mengarah kepada konsumsi bagi kawasan industri padat energi seperti smelter dan konversi gasifikasi pembangkit listrik di berbagai lokasi di Indonesia yang masih menggunakan PLTD sebagai energi primernya. Selain industri smelter yang berpotensi menyerap natural gas hingga 80 BBTUD dan konversi pembangkit listrik yang berpotensi menyerap hingga 76 BBTUD, pengembangan manufaktur bahan-bahan petrokimia juga akan berdampak mengurangi emisi dibandingkan dengan pemanfaatan gas sebagai bahan bakar secara keseluruhan. Kemudian yang tidak kalah menariknya untuk diangkat dalam mendiskusikan transisi energi adalah strategi dekarbonisasi pada industri hulu migas. Tadi sedikit banyak juga sudah disinggung oleh Pak Hengki. Optimasi operasi industri migas dapat dilakukan melalui pengurangan flaring dan venting serta peningkatan efisiensi hingga penerapan teknologi CCS atau CCUS. Selain untuk meningkatkan kebutuhan industri hulu migas, teknologi CCS atau CCUS merupakan kunci menjalankan operasinya melalui pemanfaatan karbon untuk peningkatan produksi melalui EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery, dan penyimpanan karbon baik dalam wilayah kerja migas maupun di berbagai potensi lokasi penyimpan lainnya seperti pada salin aquifer dan sebagainya. Bahkan penerapan CCS Hub dengan potensi Indonesia yang juga sangat besar untuk penyimpanan karbon akan dapat membantu berbagai industri di dalam negeri hingga tetangga lintas batas yang pasti akan memerlukan penyimpanan karbon sebagai fasilitas karbon offset pada era ekonomi karbon yang akan segera tiba. Beberapa pihak telah melakukan studi dengan hasil yang bervariasi mengenai kapasitas potensi penyimpanan karbon yang dimiliki Indonesia. Untuk itu saat ini Dirjen Migas sedang melakukan studi dan pemetaan untuk mendapatkan kepastian kapasitas penyimpanan karbon di Indonesia sebelum dimanfaatkan secara optimal. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, demikianlah penyampaian keynote speech yang dapat disampaikan pada forum webinar internasional ini yang kami harapkan dapat menghasilkan poin-poin yang bermanfaat bagi kita semua. Sekali lagi, terima kasih kepada pengurus pusat PII yang telah menyelenggarakan webinar internasional yang bermanfaat ini. Selamat berdiskusi, terima kasih. Demikian host yang keynote speech dari Bapak Menko. Kami kembalikan waktu dan tempat.
Thank you very much. Due to the time constraint that we have, I would like to ask my co-host here if there is any question for the keynote speakers. Just one question for now. Is there any question at all? Let me check.
Or through the chat group, Pak Hartanto, I can reply to the question in the chat group.
Yes. So as far as the questions from the audience right now, there is none. So I will proceed forward with the speaker, but please send your question to the speaker if you have any. So I am going to move forward. Now I am going to invite everyone to turn on their video because we'll have a photo session. So then we have everyone here. So Dayu, can you help me with this? Dayu or David, could you lead the photo session?
Okay, we have a bunch of people here, so we might need to take a couple of screen prints. So everyone, if you can turn on your camera, Josh and I will start the picture session. So take number 1, 3, 2, 1. All right, there's still a couple of screens to go. Okay, take number 2. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, take number 3. Okay, hold on. 3, 2, 1. All right. Just a second, guys. Only 2 more to go. 3, 2, 1. All right. 1 more to go. All right. That's it, Pak.
Done, David. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope that the speakers from the ministries could stay for the whole session so that we will be able to give some suggestions for Indonesia. So our next speaker is Professor Dan Kamen, but he could not join live. So he had submitted a video for us to play. So David, could you play the video? And then we'll continue with the second speaker.
Hello, I'm Dan Kamen, Professor of Energy at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm very sorry I cannot join this joint webinar between US participants and the Institution of Engineers in Indonesia in person. It's because I'm actually conducting field work in the Norwegian Arctic right now. So I send my congratulations, my appreciation of hearing a few comments from myself that have been recorded, and I hope to talk with you in the future. The reason why I'm so interested in this meeting is that because many of the work projects that go on in my laboratory, RAIL, the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory, and you can see the website here and also my individual Twitter feed where we post results from lab work, generally a post or two a day if you're interested to follow us. But I say that because many of the projects we're doing right now are on national scale decarbonization, including some new work with partners in Indonesia at the University of Indonesia that I hope you'll find interesting or at least instructive. I say that because my laboratory team, RAIL, is highly interdisciplinary. You can see some of the scholars here from Nigeria, South Sudan, Ireland, Kenya, Nadilha Resiliani, who is receiving her PhD this year from the University of Indonesia in the middle, students from India, from Mexico, and other partners, where we try to both conduct joint research, look directly for policy opportunities to put work into progress, and to engage in joint researcher training. And as you'll hear in a second, I think that's really a critical feature to getting innovative, sometimes challenging projects in the decarbonization space on board, to have real joint representation. I'll make my comments quickly, but I'll also send the slide deck if anyone wants to look at them, because many of the slides I'll show here briefly are things that you already know well. The first, of course, is that the commitments we've made to decarbonization, the light blue area at the top, are a good start, but they're insufficient. We need to get down on that lowest pathway, the 1.5 degree C pathway, and that's why the recent arrangement between Indonesia and international partners amounting in the $20 billion for decarbonization are so critical. More and more sectors, more and more countries, and more partnerships are needed to make these goals real. And I believe Indonesia is a prime candidate, not just because the partnership's been signed and the money hopefully is flowing, but because the opportunities in Indonesia are so impressive in terms of the ability to rapidly decarbonize and to produce more jobs, and to produce more jobs at lower cost than business as usual. And I say that not just because I'm optimistic, which I am often accused of, but because of much of the work that we're doing with our community partners. You can see a list of partners in the environmental space, in the energy for conflict space, in the local energy project areas, and many of the partnerships with the businesses you see in the middle, from some of power projects in Africa, like Virunga Power, like the Blue Climate Initiative in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, like the work we're doing with some new energy providers like Natel, which is a micro hydro company that could be very useful in Indonesia, and many of the national partnerships. And I've not yet included Indonesia on this list, not that we're not working there actively, but I generally add once we've not only published work together, which we hope to do in the next few weeks, but also for when we've gotten real policy action moving forward. I say that because in our laboratory, one of the tools we develop is the so-called switch. It's a capacity expansion model. It's open source, open access, and we've worked on it in the areas that you see in color here: Western North America, Mexico, Chile, East Africa, parts of Eastern Europe, Indonesia, Malaysia, in particular in Sarawak and Sabah, and we hope soon Indonesia as well. The capacity expansion model that we developed, again, it's open source. It's simple to set up, but often analytically challenging. It is a nonlinear program where we look at the energy generation from renewable and fossil sources. We look at transmission investments, energy efficiency programs, economics, and other behavioral features. I won't dwell on the model details. I think its most important feature is that it's high resolution in space and time, and that it's open source. And in fact, in Indonesia, as you'll hear, we're doing this in parallel with some work with some more conventional tools like times. When we build scenarios, we're not only looking at the amount of energy we'll need to meet demand, and this is a sample curve from 2050. That's the black line running across the middle. That's a forecast or a synthetic demand for mid-century. And this is an energy mix for a fully decarbonized, a zero carbon energy sector across Western North America, anchored on California, and California is the world's 5th largest economy. If you add up all of the rest of Western North America, including Western Canada and Mexico, it's a very large region indeed. And you can see light blue is wind, yellow is solar, dark blue is hydro, something we're zeroing out in California. Red is geothermal. There's a very thin purple bar of nuclear. And then these negative going orange spikes are energy going into storage. And then the orange you see on the graph is energy coming out of storage. There is some gas with carbon capture, although I don't believe we will need that in the scenarios that we'll talk about going forward. One of the many challenges, and this is something that'll be familiar to, I think, everyone here, is worrying about the imbalance of energy markets as we generate more and more renewables. This is the so-called famous duck curve from California, showing net demand, demand minus self-generation, and the quote unquote worry that utilities face, and which they've used to unfortunately slow down progress, noting that great deal amount of renewables, in particular solar during the day, means a hollowing out of the back of the duck. And that also means that the marginal price of new solar coming online may drop. Actually, I think this is a problem that presents its own solution, not to sound too Confucian, but if we think about this massive oversupply, and in California last month, we were able to power the entire state economy and export energy for brief periods of time to our other states. We met 104% of our generation needs. And really the issue that's very exciting here, and it's a perfect match for Indonesia, is to think about bi-directional charging of vehicles, from scooters to buses to cars, utilizing this area during the day when we can overgenerate renewables. Indonesia is even easier because of the potential for great amounts of baseload geothermal in the mix, something that we don't plan on in California. We do currently have the world's largest geothermal plant, the geysers, at over 2 gigawatts, but I don't expect that much more expansion. But really thinking about bidirectional charging allows us to solve 2 or maybe 3 problems at once: moving to clean energy, powering vehicles cleanly, and utilizing the battery capacity of those vehicles. And I say that because one of the opportunities where I think Indonesia has a huge role to play is the transition from gray hydrogen, which we don't want, to blue hydrogen, which we can perhaps tolerate, to green hydrogen, which is what we need. And largely by thinking about large amounts of solar on land and floating, offshore wind, and in particular, a major expansion in Indonesia's geothermal capacity on all the islands in all the regions, so that the massive transmission bottleneck that we'll forecast in our modeling does not come true. I say that because, of course, what we're all banking on, and we're banking on it for good reason, is the remarkable progress in the drop in the price of energy systems through the learning curve, sometimes called Swanson's law, Moore's law, and again, you all know this, where the cost of a technology, C, drops over time as a predictable function of the volume of sales. This power law, again, this is a log plot of price versus cumulative global installation with time, just a date stamp along the curve, has shown a very steady 5 or 6 decade long path of 20% reduction in cost every time we double the amount of a technology like solar panels, batteries that are installed. This is, again, just the graph in over time showing those cost decline curves. Again, this is familiar to everyone, but we bank on it. And in fact, as Indonesia enters the fold, the possibility to do domestic manufacturing of wind turbines, batteries, other technologies to not only meet local clean energy demand, but do so in a way that generates even more jobs is very real. I say that because now we're at a remarkable point where it's now cheaper to build new renewable energy power plants than it is to operate existing fossil fuel ones. And again, that's reported over 2 years ago in Bloomberg New Energy. Our results so far in Indonesia, and this is work that Nadilha is leading on, and this is really to look at regional generating capacity, looking at the price declines of technologies. These are interim results. I'd ask you not to quote them, but the real challenge is if we look at some of the more traditional times models for Indonesia, what we see is the potential need of very large amounts of transmission to Java. That is certainly technically possible, but often the long delays of transmission and the challenges of reliability mean we believe that a very large increase in the amount of local solar and geothermal power would allow us to minimize that. Again, this is results that Nadilha will be reporting out on in our first papers in the coming weeks. But really what we see is this huge opportunity to think much more seriously about a mixture of local clean energy generation, direct local use, and storage, both through stationary storage and increasingly through the use of electrified vehicles. And I say that in part because in an example project that we've conducted over the past 6 years with several university partners in China, and you can see some of the scholars involved in this work. These are all people who have spent more than 1 year in residence at the University of California, Berkeley. And this is the kind of result that I believe that an expanded partnership with Indonesia, such as we're doing right now with Nadilha Reselyani's year-long visit to us, could really take part. And what I'm highlighting here is the role of electric vehicles. Here's a sample paper from that large-scale partnership where we looked at the potential to power not the 5 million electric vehicles that China has today, but going towards amazing numbers like 50 or 60 million in the Chinese case, largely through an expansion of offshore wind to power not only clean energy demands and to remove the need for the massive amount of coal that China is permitting and has started to construct in certain areas. And it's a lesson, I think, for Indonesia because of the exceptional renewable energy resources you have and of the very important partnerships already in place with the US Agency for International Development, with Bappenas, with PLN, with the Asian Development Bank to think about electrified fleets of scooters, two-wheel vehicles today, moving towards four-wheel vehicles as more and more of those are adopted. In fact, this is a project where recent PhD student of mine, Andy Zheng, got his PhD at Berkeley, then went back to Chengdu, China, developed a smart data EV company. I'm part of that team, and you can see a number of Chinese researchers, both based in the US and based in China. Again, I think this is a good model for partnerships in Indonesia. And what we worked on initially was very large-scale fleet conversion. In this case, in 1 year, we were able to replace all 21,000 taxis in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen. That's 95% of the fleet, not quite 100%, but pretty close, with electric taxis. These are BYD taxis made in Shenzhen. And what our laboratories team was focused on was the smart data, the Internet of Things, to avoid the very long waits to recharge and to utilize those vehicles that were not in service as part of a distributed mobile vehicle to grid fleet. You can see the logo of this company, Pear Taxi, Pear City, as it's called in this case, in operation. And what we're able to do is by optimizing charging locations and data on which charging stations had space available, we went from the picture on the black, and the darker the color and the larger the circles mean the longer the wait time, to optimize very quickly by giving drivers an app that told them what spots were available and rewarded prompt arrival when their recharge time came available. That app went online and we saw a 20% reduced delay time and a 20 to 30% increase in revenue almost at once. I say that because in thinking about energy systems for both very large megacities like Shenzhen, but also for more distributed systems. So not only thinking about the needs on Java, but energy in Irian Jaya, energy needs in Nusa Tenggara, in Moluccas, in Kalimantan, there are opportunities to not only build clean energy to replace fossil projects, but also to power electric transportation on a variety of scales. In this project from 2019, working with IEEE, we were able to optimize some locations for hydro, both large and micro hydro projects across Laos as a way to optimize both local energy supply and export for the power they wanted to export. The last piece of the story where I would encourage us to think about collaboration going forward is sustainable mining, or the removal of mining by recycling and perhaps direct seawater extraction of lithium, cobalt, other critical materials, as we green the supply chain, which will be critical to both keeping the environmental signature of clean energy low and the human rights damages that we see right now through child labor and other mining practices around the world, notably in the Congo, but Kalimantan has some challenges as well. I highlight all this, and I want to touch on one last point that I've not covered in this talk, but in many of my other talks I do. At Berkeley, I am the co-director of our Center for Environmental Justice. And one of the many things we found by surveying companies in Silicon Valley in California is that racial and gender diversity is not only a good idea on moral grounds, but it has real tangible benefits. Here in a survey of 200 companies, we found that those most diverse companies in terms of their boards were able to raise money more rapidly and raise more money and to meet their goals more quickly. Diversity equals economic returns, not just mental and social justice returns. So many areas of work, marine energy and hydrogen production, very promising for Indonesia. I would add geothermal, a critical area for international partnerships and expansion. Right now, Kenya is the country with the most new geothermal going on, and it's invited many international teams from the US, Iceland, from New Zealand and elsewhere to be part of that expansion. The challenge of large amounts of transmission demand for Indonesia is certainly going to be there. It's one that PLN is focused on, but it's also an area where I think a real clear focus on far more local distributed clean energy, smart vehicle grid connections, opens up a really interesting, important new pathway to make that $20 billion Indonesia is now taking on board for the greening of the process, to put it to best work. Finally, I think we all have to not only talk about, but do real concrete projects on how to green the material supply chain. So I look forward to working with you on this. I look forward to partnering. Again, I think we can bend this curve down to the green pathway that I showed before. This is the type of partnerships that I believe we won't get to unless we exchange not only ideas, but people in terms of working back and forth. And again, Indonesia and the US are primed, set up for this. Again, here's the information from my website. I look forward to talking with you more in the future. Sorry, I can't be there in person, but terima kasih. I look forward to this collaboration going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Dan Kamen. Since he is not with us right now, I will skip the questions for him, but you can always put your questions and we'll direct it to him after the webinar. So for our next speaker is Dr. Nanjo. She is a senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in the US. Before she gives her speech, I would like to invite you all to, if you have any questions, to submit your questions in the Google form that has been posted in the chat box. So we have disabled the chat box so it will not be too crowded. But if you have any questions, I would encourage you to submit your questions through the Google form that we have posted in the chat box. So Dr. Cho, the time is yours.
Thank you, Hart, for the kind introduction. So my name is Nanjo. I'm a senior scientist and at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And also I'm a technical program manager for the US government collaboration with 8 emerging economies to advance carbon neutrality and net zero and outlook called Net Zero World. And so today I'm very delighted to be invited to give one of the keynote speech and focus more on accelerating climate and mitigation actions. Very quick introduction of my institution, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and we're located in Berkeley, California, very close to UC Berkeley. We're actually one of the campuses of the University of California, but we are actually a US Department of Energy national laboratory that has 4,000 employees. We're very proud for our Nobel Prize winners, and we have probably more than 13 with 2 added last year. So more like a 15 and Nobel laureates. And so some of you may be familiar with us, so I won't go into detail with more introduction, but our mission is to bring science solution to the world and to address the most critical challenges facing humankind. And so in this case, we think climate change is one of the most challenging problems. So last 3 years, I was very honored to be in one of the lead authors for the IPCC 6 assessment report. And I just concluded and the urgency for climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. Here, I just want to give you a little bit an overview of the key findings. So overall, in the last 10 years, 2010 to 2019, the average annual greenhouse gas emissions were at the highest level in human history. And so the conclusion also includes that, and we are really not on track limiting the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, I think, and Professor Dan Cameron also pointed out. As you can see in this chart, from 2010 to 2019, we actually increased quite a bit if we compare with 1990 level, and almost increased by more than 50%. So that's large and growth and continued and growing. So unless there are immediate and deep emission reduction across all sectors, the conclusion is that 1.5 degrees is beyond the reach. This further illustrated the sense of urgency for all of us to take action now, and not only counting on technology that are not commercialized or not even invented, but also accelerated deployment of all the technologies we know today. There are hopes. Some countries already achieved steady decrease in emission consistent with limiting warming to 2 degrees C. And then also there are 826 cities and 103 regions announced zero emission targets. And as also noted by Professor Dan Cameron, a lot of these clean technology solutions have increased their penetration in almost all countries. And also the cost of these technologies have significantly declined, as you can see in the photovoltaics, onshore wind, and the battery technologies. And you can see the penetration of these technologies really skyrocketed in the last 20 years. However, if you look at the entire stock or fleet, the share of these new clean technologies are still relatively low. So there's still a long way to go. So overall, the report finds that to limit the warming to around 2 degrees Celsius, we need to peak GHG emission before 2025, which is only 2 years from now, and reduce that by 27% by 2030. And if we want to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the GHG emission, it needs to peak before 2025 And that's again, it's 2 to 3 years from now, and reduced by 43% by 2030. And so there are other consideration of carbon removal and or storage in technologies only if we cannot achieve the net zero by demand reduction, efficiency, and alternative fuels. We will need to use that. So there are already options available in almost all sectors, and we can deploy and very fast and halve the emission and by 2030. And so I will just very quickly go through some of these and strategies in all the sectors. In energy sector, as we all know, the key is to reduce fossil fuel use and to achieve electrification of the end-use sector, to improve efficiency and use alternative fuels such as hydrogen and sustainable biofuels. We also need to reduce demand by changing our lifestyles and through material and efficiency, circular economy, and to reduce the needs for a lot of these energy services. In transportation sector, we also all know, and the electric vehicles and could be adopted for private cars, for public fleet, buses, light duty trucks, and only leaving the aviation shipping be a little bit harder to abate. But for those, there are also low emission hydrogen and biofuels, and that could be utilized. Cities could be planned better, particularly for emerging economies such as Indonesia. I understand you are building a new capital city, and the better design, urban planning, and it will make a significant contribution toward in zero energy and zero emission and buildings or zero emission cities or transportation system. Buildings, we already can build net zero energy buildings, and all the technologies measures are already available, and they are cost effective. So how can we deploy these new buildings and net zero energy buildings at 100%? Can we retrofit existing buildings and soon at 100%? And those will require ambitious policy packages because technology is already there. The system's already there, and then we have the know-how on how to do it. Industry is a bit hard to abate, and that will include efficient use of these materials, but also achieve efficiency and alternative fuel. And finally, we'll need to use carbon and dioxide removal technologies. That's the area we need more research, more investment, and more innovation. And we also need to protect more land, and because it serves the natural and sink for the carbon emissions. All of these require significant investment, policy, and economic instrument and innovation. And as presented in the slide currently, and the investment and that's being put in to tackle the climate change issue is 3 to 6% lower than what's needed by 2030. So there's a significant gap. And we also need a regulatory and also economic instruments and to help accelerate adoption. So then I will turn into the biggest emitter, China, and for which we conduct a very thorough and outlook and to see if China can achieve its own carbon neutrality targets. So I will skip a lot of details and then just want to mention that we developed 2 scenarios. One is a continuous improvement scenario in which we assume China will adopt maximum feasible share of today's commercially available cost-effective technologies, continuation of our existing policy. And also we build a deep mitigation scenario. Basically, we just put every technology we know today, whether it's a hydrogen, whether it's a biojet, whether it's a electric vehicle and the storage and everything in just to see if we can get to net zero. So Here's the result for the continuous improvement scenario. If you look at the last 40 years, it's continued growing much faster in the previous 20 years on the left. On the right, you can see future with the continuous improvement scenario, we basically flip the curve and then reduce emission by half. 50. And then you can see in buildings and can be significantly decarbonized, leaving industry and transportation sector and still dominate some of the emissions in going forward. If we look at the net zero or deep mitigation scenario, and you can see it's completely flipped over compared with the last 40 years. And this requires net zero energy building to be 100% by 2050. And also transportation sector largely decarbonized in the green section, but industry, there's still a third of the industry emission exists at the end of 2050. So that is a gap. It's 2 gigatons of CO2. And if we look at the different sectors, milestones, and you will understand how challenging this means. Private cars electrification by 2050 needs to be 95%. Today, even though private electric car sales in China is very impressive, and also penetration is in many cities are very large, it's still just 5% stock. If we look at the heavy duty trucking electrification, 0%, it needs to be 75%. Net zero energy building needs to be 60% in all stock. Today, it's 2%. Industry, co-use in cement industry, it needs to be reduced to 25%. Today, it's 86%. So it illustrates all the really challenge that requires significant investment, significant policy. So what do we do with this 2 gigatons of gap? That's where we need to utilize carbon and storage and utilization and removal, but also we need to accelerate in all of these existing technology adoption. So here are a long list of things we can still do. I can leave the slides to you all and won't go into the detail of each, but you can see the long list of things we can do in industry, accelerate and the efficiency improvement and have the behavior change, and also deploy innovative technologies, including electrifying manufacturing processes and electrify high heat supply using, for example, concentrated solar. There's also hydrogen DRI for steel making and potentially CCS. And this slide shows similarly in the strategy we can deploy in agriculture, building, transport, and the cross-cutting sector. So, and then the key policies and that will be needed to accelerate the deployment of this technology are shown here. So for example, for buildings, there are energy efficiency standards, codes, and for industry, and there are circular economy, and then also energy target setting. And there's all these policies we can deploy. So lastly, I will end with our recent study for Indonesia. We just replicated the methodology we use for China and look at the scenarios for Indonesia. And I think some of our government leaders earlier also talk about your own net zero scenarios and how you are going to achieve that. We found that Indonesia can reduce the overall CO2 emission by 60% by 2050. And through these electrification of buildings, efficiency, phasing out fossil fuel industry, electrifying transportation sector, and the scale up of renewables. But transportation sector and industry sector will remain to be very challenging to decarbonize. We know more how we can deploy net zero energy buildings. On top of what you're already doing, very impressive standards, building codes you already have, and their potential for electrification for cooking and the water heating, and showing this chart that could still be further deployed. So here's an example of what could still be done in the building sector. For example, cooling load reduction and also efficiency improvement for cooling technologies such as air conditioners using heat pumps, and demand flexibility using demand response. And we found that Indonesia can actually provide 20 gigawatts of electricity and through energy efficiency and for appliances by 2030. So that's mostly done through efficiency for different and home appliances, including air conditioners, TVs, and washing machines. So industry sector, here's a long list of things we can still do for the different categories. And for transportation sector, we can continue to improve efficiency for aviation and the rail and the shipping, at least 1% per year, and also reduce the freight vehicle kilometers traveled by 10%, and then accelerate electrification and use of alternative fuels. So with that, and I will conclude my presentation, and thank you for your attention. So I will see if there are questions. I don't know, Professor Hart.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Cho. So I have a question for you, and then I will also read some questions that are already posted. So my question is, you said that electric vehicles is one of the ways to go in the future, but as of now, the production of the batteries for the electric vehicles rely heavily on coal. So if we increase the electric vehicle production, that also means that indirectly we are increasing coal energy consumption. So in the long run, it's just an evil circle, right? It's not going to end. So is there any solution to that?
Yes, you're right. In the near term, and that will be the case. More electrification means more coal use. It means more actual emissions. In the long run, and that will flip. And so I think it's a very important. And when we are promoting electric vehicles at the same time, really accelerated the decarbonization of power sector to have more renewables, and also considering some of these advanced measures, and Professor Dan Kamen also talked about potentially, for example, for cities, for buildings, and to install more rooftop PV and other type of renewables, solar thermal, at the same time, and to deploy more electric vehicles that could be used as storage options as well, and to provide the flexible load. So that kind of a combination and will be very good near-term strategies, particularly in cities.
Thank you. So I have also a question here from the participants. How are industries in the USA collaborating with research institutions and government agencies to develop and deploy low carbon technologies such as carbon capture and storage to mitigate emissions from industrial processes?
So that's also a good question, and it's a very challenging for CCS or carbon removal technologies to take off, because there are not a sufficient economic case right now, in a business model. It really requires more government and policies such as incentives, subsidies, and for this technology. For example, US and has implemented, and I think recently, I think it's called Cube 45, which provides a third incentive to these development and the deploy of these technologies, but also carbon tax and carbon trading programs. These are all very effective and for the development and of these technologies. And also I want to use the COVID vaccine development as an example, right? It typically takes a long time for the industry and to do that without government intervention, right? But for COVID, we have the government provided a lot of incentives and also the support. And as a result, very quickly, key companies produce different types of vaccine that could be used and put in the market at the historical time, right? That's something I think of if we are serious about climate change, if that we see that as a crisis, and that's kind of also the model we should adopt for industry to work together with government and academia.
Thank you. And I have one last question here due to the time constraints. So the question is, what about the end of life of the battery and the PV panels? So we know that the PV panels and the batteries will contribute to better energy, but at the end of the life cycle, we have to do something with them, right? So would that cause any issue in the future?
Yes, that is a very important issue. I think, unfortunately, the recycling of these clean technology solutions, the rate is still very low today. And there's some of them are technological issues, some are other regulatory issues. And so I think the government and should support and the research development of reuse of these different end-of-life technologies, but also set up, for example, regional battery recycle hubs that could be used and for the whole region. For example, Indonesia could be one of the hubs for Southeast Asia, and to serve the entire market. But overall, I think it's very important to tackle that problem because the life cycle embodied emission and is not and cannot be ignored and for these technologies.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Cho. It's very, very insightful. I would refer other questions to you directly after the webinar, but for now, I would stop the questioning due to the time constraint, and I would invite the third speaker, Mr. Fabi Tumiwa. He's the Executive Director at Institute for Essential Services Reform in Indonesia, and he will present on decarbonizing Indonesia energy system challenges and opportunities.
Thank you, Pak Tanto, and good morning, good evening to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to speak in this very, very esteemed events. As been introduced, my name is Fabi Tumiwa. I'm leading an independent energy and climate think tank in Indonesia called IESR. We've been around since 2006, so we are kind of non-academic based institution, but we're conducting a lot of research, policies, modeling works on the energy and climate. And later on, you can check our website and you can see a number of publications that we have published so far. We also work quite closely with a number of US institutions, including Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I think we are right now doing work on industrial decarbonization with Dr. Nan and her team in LBNL, as well as we provide support to the Net Zero World, the initiative by the Department of Energy of US to support Indonesia on their energy transition. So yeah, we've been working quite closely with a number of institutions in the US and also non-US institutions. So you have heard maybe most of this Indonesia decarbonization strategy, net zero strategies as presented by Pak Henki and also from Marfet. So I would like to focus on looking at a number of policy and institutional challenge how to get there. But if you look at the discourse of the energy transition in Indonesia, is actually pretty new. Before 2019, and we look at all the energy planning that published officially by government, it never mentioned about energy transition. It never mentioned about phasing out coal. Surprisingly, in the 2020, is the first actually open statement or official statement made by government that Indonesia considered to reach net zero emissions, and it's quite ahead compared to the other developing countries, member of G20. And during the COP26 in Glasgow, Indonesia is part of a countries that sign on a global call to clean power transitions. So in that declaration, there's a couple of a specific statement which supported by Indonesia, including to ending coal by the late of 2040s. Right. So it's not just the statement made by the government during that events, but later on we see that during 2021 there's a following with a statement of net zero emission target that for the first time the government stated that we are going to reach net zero emission by 2060 or sooner with the international support, and emission peak of the energy sector by 2030, and no more new coal power plants in planning. So I think it's quite a big shift in terms of policies. Following that, last year, 2022, we have seen that the government actually issued a number of regulation, presidential regulation number 112 to 2022, that lay out the incentive pricing for renewable energy. But under Article 3 in that regulation, actually specifically mentioned about stop building new coal power plants. Those who are not granted permit before the regulation was issued shouldn't be built, and even for those who are given permit, they have to they can still build, but they have to reduce their emission by 35%, and end of lifetime in an operation by 2050. So it's a big decisions from Indonesian government. We also introduced the cap and trade for coal plants that has announced end of last year, and again it's starting this year. So it's related to the emission trading scheme that Pak Hengki just mentioned in his opening. Well, Indonesia also signed Just Energy Transition Partnership during the G20 meeting in November in Bali. And Just Energy Transition Partnership has two key goals, two main goals. First, that to reach power sector emission peak, 290 million tons of CO2 by 2030, and 34% of renewable energy mix by 2030, and net zero emission by 2050 of the power sector. So we see that with the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the government focus on decarbonizing power sectors, and that will go first. I mean, than the rest of energy sectors like transport and industry. But this is very, 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 very clear. Also, part of that, part of this presidential regulation number 112, Ministry of Energy is mandated to plan this coal phase out roadmap. So currently is being discussed with the ministry, with the other ministry and PLN to phase out the coal by 2050, coal plant by 2050. During the G20 summit, Indonesia also, the G20 agreed on the Bali Compact, which are the key principle of just energy transition, and this been highlighted as a guidance for G20 countries to embark the energy transition journey. So this is one of the a very significant outcome in Indonesia contribution to the effort of the global effort on the energy transition. Indonesia climate change commitments embraces energy transition as one of the core elements, and we see there's a number of policies that has been issued after we ratified Paris Agreement in 2016. So Paris Agreement came in 2015, and Indonesia ratified with the law number 16, 2016. And after that, came up with, during that ratification, Indonesia published the first NDC. So it's 2016, and we see that in September 2050, we have enhanced our NDC target. So now the target is higher, reducing emissions around 32% from business as usual. So it's increased almost 3% from the previous NDC. That's under conditional, and 43% call as unconditional. This is unconditional support by 2030. So it's increased around 2%. So the increasing of enhanced NDC actually come from energy sectors. So there is addition of the emission reduction target from the energy sectors from the previous NDC, and also, as I mentioned, later on, that was in September, and later on in November, we signed on the Just Energy Transition Partnership. So the government plan to issue second NDC in 2025, which I think will be included a number of measures that has been agreed, like coal retirements and increasing renewable energy mix in the power sector and in the entire energy sectors. Indonesia, if you look at Indonesia energy transitions discourse, it's really aligned with the aspiration of high economic growth, while pursuing sustainable development, and it's propelled by high energy consumption. So if you look at a number of government energy planning scenario, it is that our energy sector development very much related with the ideas that the Indonesia should become developed country. So it means that we have to increase our income, avoiding middle income trap, and becoming a major economic powerhouse in 2045. That's what we call Indonesia Emas. Also, I think from the government perspective, that managing regional disparity between East and West, and also increase human development equally is one of the important development policies that current governments are doing. Also, we look at the number of in terms of energy consumption, because there is a perspective in the government that become developed country, it means that we have to increase energy consumption, and I think it's true for in terms of a number of studies shows that the economic level increase, so does the energy consumption. So we plans to increase our energy consumption to a level equal to developed countries, so around above 5,000 kilowatt hour per capita. That's for the electricity, but also with the constraint of meeting our emission target. So emission peak in 2030, both in the power and the entire energy sectors, and meeting carbon neutral gradually in 2060. That's what we call a net zero emission 2060 or earlier. At the same time, from the energy, since Indonesia has been relying on fossil fuel, in particular oil, and oil is very, very important as a fuel for transport sectors. And we have seen that in the last 15 years, the oil production declined gradually. Right now, around 700,000 barrels per day, as our consumption reach more than 1 1.5 million barrel per day. So more than half of our oil is now actually import. So managing this oil productions and consumption is one of the key policies of the governments. And that's why in the last 10 years, Indonesia has been developing biofuel, mainly from palm oil, with see as effort to replace import oil with this indigenous biofuel produced in Indonesia. And last but not least, also all in with the energy transition, balancing energy security, affordability, and sustainability is a key issue which always come during the discussion of the energy transition strategy and pathways in Indonesia. So in the table you can see that's some numbers that I took from the latest revision of national energy policy. As you know, the Indonesia has issued national energy policy in 2014, and right now that policy is being revised to be aligned with net zero emission target by 2060 or sooner. So before I talk more on this, what is actually the pathways and the challenge for energy transition, we can see that this is the landscape of Indonesia energy sectors. 88% of our energy supply come from fossil fuel. In this case, coal share around 38%, oil and gas follow. Our primary energy growth around almost 5% in the last 5 years. Electricity consumption, last year we reached 1,300 kilowatt hour, and it's around 5% as well in the last few years. Total investment in energy sector is around 21 billion last year, but in average in the last 5 years it's between 21 to 24 billion. And I think it's very, very, very important that also as our energy demand increase, so does the need to build more infrastructure, and for that we need more investment. Electricity generation capacity has reached 81 gigawatt around, and renewables supply around 12.5 gigawatt. We have almost reached 100% electricity ratio. There's still a number of area in the last mile that need to be connected. The government target is to reach this 100% electricity ratio by 2024. Energy sector intensities increase as we increase the utilizations of coal in the last 15 years. So now reach 0.27 kilogram CO2 per barrel oil equivalents. And also in terms of subsidy, energy subsidy is increasing. Last year, energy subsidies, not including compensation to the state-owned enterprise, is reached around $11 billion. So that's current landscape. This is you have seen from Pak Hengki, and this is actually the roadmap of the net zero emission by Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So we see that along that in order to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner, then we can see that the government also focus on the power sector. So the power sector emission is expected to be more or less decarbonized before 2060, and other sector like industry and transport follow. So this is kind of a number of strategy that government has planned in to meet that net zero emission, including electrification, not only EV but also in the cooking, renewable energy development, also coal-fired power plant moratorium, and early retirement of existing coal-fired power plant that is being a part of a program under Just Energy Transition Partnership. develop new energy resources like hydrogen and ammonia, implementing like carbon capture and storage, as well as energy efficiency. So this is the official, I can say, the government strategy, and it is more details, and I will see part of that. Renewables dominate the future net zero emission compatible power sector. Also, that's the energy. This is more power sector, with coal fleets plans to be phased out by 2050. Right now, with the as I mentioned, with presidential regulation 112 and also the JETP goal, and with that, then we see that after 2030, most of the growth of energy supply will come from renewables, and we see here that solar actually will be increased, and it's very obvious that we have a plenty of solar. ISR has done some assessment on the solar resources, and you can find that in our website, that report. We identified that based on the land availabilities and solar irradiance, we can generate around 3,400 up to 20,000 terawatt peak of solar. So from resource perspective, there is no constraint for solar to be developed. And I think now, as we will use more solar in the near future, so there is a number of technical improvement that in the power system that need to be improved, including the utilization of energy storage. Is not just battery, but also other type of energy storage like pumped hydro storage, for instance, or even new storage technology like compressed air storage and another, which is most of this energy storage in Indonesia is not really well known or not well implemented. I've seen that in the latest statement made by PLN, that they are going to start incorporating a number of incorporating energy storage in the number of projects, including the utility scale solar PV that will supply the new capital in East Kalimantan. That's PLN is currently planning to build next year. So this is the study. I just take it this the study that ISR produced 2021, deep decarbonization of Indonesia energy system, and based on this model, we conclude that it is actually technically feasible and economically viable for the energy sector in Indonesia to reach decarbonization, especially for the power sector to reach net zero emission earlier. And you can see that this based on this our model, it shows us that the majorities of the energy supply will come from solar, and the reason not only because of the resources availability, but also like the cost competitiveness of solar. As we can see that the solar price now very, very low, and this is optimization model. So it will take the cheapest resources given the constraint of the system. But in addition to that, after that, there's a number of institutions that also produce this net zero emission pathway for Indonesia. One of them is actually International Energy Agency. So sorry, this is the source is actually from the publication made by IEA, published last year with MEMR, Minister of Energy Mineral Resources. So it also shows that two scenario, and with the net zero emission scenario, IEA came with the entire energy sector pathways for that, and we can see increased utilization of renewable energy, while we are still maintaining a small number of fossil fuel, but as natural gas and others and coal, and that's for especially captive coal, it has to be equipped with carbon captures and utilization and storage. And I think that's what has become still problematic, I think, as carbon capture and storage technology for coal plants or also for natural gas is still expensive, and number of pilot project has shown that it's the reliability is actually questioned. It's not included a new technology like direct air capture because it's the early, it's still emerging. The economics and the reliability is not there. But I think in this modeling work, IAA tried to try to include all the feasible, all the commercially available technology today. The other also that I want to show this study also that come from IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency. They published also last year with MEMR. So the result of IRENA is actually quite similar with our study, which is look at the entire energy sectors. So they look at power, transport, industries, and buildings. So they come with this energy mix for the 2050 with a number of scenario. For instance, IRENA look at to be aligned with Paris Agreement goals. So this is what makes different. Our study and IRENA study look at what is needed for Indonesia energy system to be comply with Paris Agreement target, which is to reach below 2 degree, 1.5 degree temperature goal. So IRENA has a number of scenario like 85% of renewables, 90% of renewables, and 100% of renewables, right? So this is you can check their report. So after look at the number of the study, you can see that the decarbonization of energy sectors in Indonesia actually can be achieved by implementing a set of measures, and this is based on the technology that available today, but it's also tailored to the specific subsector need. For instance, we can see from this all four energy sectors that the energy efficiency apply to all sectors. We can do energy efficiency in the power, in transport, industry, and building. Material efficiency apply for industry and building. Decarbonization technologies applies the power industry and also building. Power and industry, utilization of renewable energy in all sectors. Clean fuel, hydrogen, ammonia, and other synthetic fuels for the power transport and in industry. Fuel switching, as we see that in Indonesia also using this biofuel, and digitalizations, the implementation of smart grid in the power, as we will integrate more variable renewable energy, making our grid smarter. I think it's a no-brainer. But how to get there? Implementing this technology and shift the mode of operation of the power, including reform the power market, is actually needed to enable faster digitalizations of our power system, and also electrification, which it can be done in particular to replace a fossil fuel burned for heating, for industrial process heating in industry and also building. So these are a number of measures that we think with the current technology can be applied in Indonesia energy sector. So what is actually the challenge? We have a number of challenges in Indonesia, and that's not technical issue. It's more like social, political, and investment perspective. First, that of course fossil fuel interest. Indonesia is a fossil fuel rich country, in particular coal, and coal is not just source of electricity, cheapest electricity in Indonesia, and we provide subsidy a lot on utilizing coal, but also one of the largest export commodity for the country. As you can see that in the last 10 years.
Fabi,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Could we wrap it up in 1 minute?
Yes, this is my.
Thank
I
you.
think this is my last slide. Right.
Thank
So
you.
you can see that that increase around 47% in the last 10 years, and that's mainly for export. Energy transition require planning, and that's a planning and coordination is always challenging in Indonesia. Investment, our assessment, and also from MEMR that we need to around more around 30 billion annual investment and lead to this like 40-50 billion after 2030. And right now our investment is on the energy sector is around 21 billion, so it needs to be scaled up. And also in terms of we have the fossil fuel infrastructure locked in, we are building a lot of coal plants right now, and that's one of the issues that we need to retire that early to meet this emission target. And last but not least, access to technology and domestic manufacturing capacity. One case is for the solar, for instance, as we will rely on the solar for the future power system or the energy system. Most of the solar panel is actually imported. Our domestic solar industries cannot compete, and basically it's very, very small right now. So building this in manufacturing capacity is very, very important with the new technology. And we know that in the solar technology that the technology development is very, very fast and also capital intensive. So that's there is a number of challenges, and this is one of the key takeaways. You can actually read it, and because of the time, I would like to end here. Just this, if you are interested to read our report and publication, you can go to our ISR website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabi. So I have 2 quick questions, so I hope that the answers are also quick. So the first question is, can Indonesia supply its own energy demand by renewable energy without doing energy import?
Well, if you look at our renewable energy resources, and we have done some simulations, the energy demand in 2050, 2060, I believe that we can supply our energy. We don't have, and we don't have to rely on import. Right now, our major imports actually from oil, as I mentioned, as well as LPG for cooking, mainly for cooking. So shifting the technology from LPG to electricity, for instance, we can reduce the LPG demand for cooking as well as oil. Through the electrification and switch to the cleaner fuels, we can replace the need for oil in the transport sector. So the answer is yes.
Okay, the next question. To achieve Indonesian national target for NZE roadmap, what will be the real incentive given from the government to industry sectors to produce clean or biofuel instead of conventional fossil fuel?
Well, right now, you see that the production of biofuel in Indonesia increasing, and I think the government already set a target to replace 40% of diesel oil in the transport sector from biofuels. And current development that the government would plans to produce 100% diesel, so green diesel with the new catalyst, but still based on palm oil. It actually we have a plenty of biomass resources that could be converted to the biofuels. But right now, the main feedstock for the biofuel is CPO. I think there is a couple of potentials, and I think it could be developed further. And I know there's a couple of research in that field in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, due to the time constraint, I would refer other questions to you directly after the webinar. Thank you for your presentation. It was very valuable. Okay, so next up we have Dr. Sridharan. He's a professor at Iowa State University. And I do apologize beforehand because I know that this is already 10:12 p.m. and I'm also in Iowa, so this might be past your bedtime, but we are waiting for your valuable insights on growth and trends of wind power in the US.
Okay, thank you, Hart. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, it's in the presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good. Again, good morning, everybody back in Indonesia. It's a pleasure to join you and share some insight on the wind power growth and trends in the US. It's been interesting to listen to the presentation thus far, especially from the ministry side and some visions for Indonesia, some aspirations. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that in terms of what really happened, I mean, you could have certainly aspiration and you could have a vision, but really happens is how the market is driven by either government policies or how you invite companies to come and do the business, right? So whether it could be local companies or outside companies, but the environment has to support it. And you'll see that in my presentation, that's exactly what happened in the US. And I also observed a couple of other observations in the past presentations. I'll point out some of the things I noted as well. So here's what I want to do. I want to just talk about growth and trends in the US for wind power. I want to specifically talk briefly about how do we build tall towers, and then very briefly I'll touch on wind energy in Indonesia, and then we can talk a little bit about about wind power in Indonesia in the future, because based on what I've heard so far, you tend to have more emphasis on solar than wind, which has shown to be not very productive in the US. So it'll be interesting to see how you would evolve around embracing different technologies, and because that would help continue to reduce the cost of electricity. So here is the US electricity generation mix. If you look at it from 2010 to 2022, somewhere here, in this time frame, there were politically, we had different parties in charge. Some embraced coal, some argued against coal, but parties came and gone in power, but you could see there's a significant drop in coal production, whereas the renewable grew over that time. Why that happened is because market dictated that. It's not the policy, it's not the government in power dictated it, but market basically dictated that. If you look at how the different sources of renewable is growing, you could see solar is picking up, wind has dominated, hydroelectric, what we have so far stays the same. There's not much significant capacity gets added. So that's a landscape. Moving forward toward 2050, there's an expectation that this sector, renewable, is going to grow significantly, and coal is going to continue to reduce, whereas the other sources are expected to pick up for the next 30 years or so. Now, if you look at what has happened to wind, so wind was pretty much started about 20 years ago, 2001, 2002 is the time frame wind started picking up in the US. You could see the added capacities in the 1.7 gigawatt. It grows gradually, and now we have installed capacity of. So some of my data is 2021, some are 2022. This is 2021 data. In 2022, and 2023, we crossed 140 gigawatt of installed wind capacity in the US. How big is that? US has the second largest installed capacity. China has more. I think when I got into wind energy, in fact, Denmark has the most amount of wind power, and you can see Denmark is not in the list. Germany then became number one. US became then number one. China took over. China does install quite a bit of wind power. However, if you look at the amount of electricity generated from wind, US still dominates, even though our installed capacity is small. So the science has to play in terms of making sure that your productivity is going to be up there so that you're not just investing and not producing wind power. If you look at the amount of wind installed, US installed 13.4 gigawatts in 2021. China installed more than 3 times of that. So China continues to invest significant amount. So you could see that numbers compared to what the rest of the world is, which is not included in the list. So it's a pretty small what's happening outside as well. If you look at the percentage of electricity generation in the US, we are only 10%. We have actually crossed 10% now, but it's very small compared to some of the other states. Other countries. You can see Denmark is over 40%. Ireland is close to 30%. There are a number of countries that are in the 10% range. China is still behind because of their large consumption. Okay, now focus on where we are building wind power in the US. You can see each of the dot on this map is wind farm. There are some in Alaska, some in California. You can see quite a few, but the significant amount is installed right here in the mid portion of the US. So we are here in Iowa. You can see there are a large number of wind farms here. We generate close to 60% of our electricity from wind. So we are one of the, we are very comparable in terms of size, maybe slightly small to Denmark. I mentioned Denmark, 45%. We now overtook Denmark and producing 58 to 60% from wind. You could see there are large gaps in this region, and that's because they don't have significant wind in this region. And that's what they believed, as the wind power is being built in this space. One of the problems in the US is that not many people actually live here. The large population of the US lives in the coastal area, here as well as here. So transporting electricity is not always cheap. So if you can generate electricity where the demand is high, it's going to be more cost effective. This is why the wind is being generated, wind power in the central part of the US. This shows the different the electricity regions. There are 7 ISO regions and 2 non-ISO regions that you see here. But these are the 2 regions that generate electricity because we have a pretty good wind condition. So you could see this is a wind map at 100 meters. And at 100 meters in some of these sites, you're looking at 7+ meters per second. So that's a good number to realize or remember as we move forward. So at 7.5 meters, you're going to be looking at a capacity factor of 35–40%, depending on the hub height. If you look at the wind penetration in terms of how wind is being built, the SPP is this region. Again, this is where we are part of this region. We are part of the MISO, but we are in this wind belt. The wind penetration here is 35% as of today. ERCOT is where Texas is, that's 24%, and the outside, the wind penetration is relatively low as well. So if we look at the technology as to what has happened to wind power technology starting from 1998 onwards, you could see that the nameplate, so we used to install 0.75 or 750 kilowatt wind turbines. today, on average, we're installing 3 megawatt wind farms. In fact, in Iowa, there's a wind farm is being built today. They're installing 4.5 megawatt turbines. So they're going significantly bigger now. Rotor diameter has grown noticeably as well. So that's a plus. Because if you increase the rotor diameter, your swept area is going to increase, and that's going to increase the production. You could see that the hub height has not changed significantly. It has grown. It used to be at 60 meters and now grown to about 80, 90 meters. But typically you would expect, as the rotor size increases, you would expect the hub height to go up as well. But that has not happened as fast as we would like to see. If you look at the capacity factor, this is basically telling you how efficiently the systems are running. In the late 90s, we built wind farms at 20% efficiency. Now we are at 40%, 40, even in some farms reaches 45%. This shows the average values. And if you look at the trend, this particular line is what's called the inverse of built specific power, with basically reflecting the size of the rotor. As the size of the rotor increases, hub height increases, you could see the production actually got better. So at 40%, you are at a very good place in terms of generating electricity and profiting from the wind farm. So when I said at the beginning, I mentioned that the wind farm, the market dictates it has to be profitable for the companies to come and invest, whether from your own country or from outside. So the numbers at the end of the day matters in terms of which is going to dominate the industry. If you look at the trend further, this is the rotor diameter I talked about. So one couple of things I want to emphasize here is that, so as the rotor diameter increases, your swept area increased. One of the things that they have now, it's very recently, they are starting to focus is what's called specific power. So it's basically the swept area divided by the turbine capacity. So you could see that trend is going down. So as it goes down, it becomes more efficient. And the most importantly, this particular curve, you could also see that this is the capital investment for the wind farms. It's actually going down with increasing or the improvement to the technology. So you could see as this goes down, you're going to be looking at producing wind power more cost effectively. So that means your levelized cost of energy should go down. And that's a trend that you see here. So as the technology improved over time, the wind power cost used to be somewhere here, came down all the way to a lower value in the $40, $50 range, and then went up. Now it's starting to go down. So in order for it to go further down, one of the things has to happen, the tower has to get taller. So the projection was that we're going to go to 80, 100, 120, 150 meters, because the bigger turbines and bigger rotor by nature is going to be requiring a taller tower. That is not happening. And that's something that we could talk a little bit further as well. So higher hub height is going to be a must as you move forward. The new technologies, when it comes to turbine technology, as well as the rotor blade size is going to matter. We do have some concern that we are able to project in terms of power production, but we are not really building tall towers in the US yet. So we are unable to do reliable models to predict financial benefits. Even though we are in the particular R&D work, we are able to provide that information to wind farm developers, but that's where the trend is going. Let's take a look at the cost of electricity. So these are shown in terms of US dollars, unsubsidized, so there's no government incentives accounted for. And I want to just briefly touch on offshore wind. There's a lot of talk in Europe. You probably heard about offshore. There's a lot of talk in the US right now about offshore wind. I just wanted you to understand a challenge or two with the offshore wind. So if you look at the solar power generation, so we are doing it at 30 to 41. So the price of solar has gone down significantly. That's the reason that solar installation has gone up. If you look at wind, it's in the $26 to $50 range, depending on the location in the US. So you can see they are very competing technology depending on the location. The more and more what we see here in the US is that people are starting to invest in both. Even in Iowa, we build solar. You go to some parts on the East Coast, they build wind, because they complement each other and reducing the need for, or at least minimizing the need for storage. Anytime you're looking at adding storage capacity, that's going to be an added cost. Somebody has to take that cost, or that's going to be impacting your cost of electricity as well. Now, here's a offshore wind cost right now in the US. You could see it's more than twice as much as we are producing onshore wind. So in the US, we do have fair amount of land. We have environmental regulations that prevents building wind farm in certain areas, but this is why people are getting all excited about going offshore. The federal government is investing money to help companies build offshore wind farm, but that subsidy is going to disappear at some point. The moment that happens, the cost of electricity for offshore is going to be, will be unsustainable. Europe is complaining today because they've gone this path. So building offshore is good. Two things to remember: the technology has need to develop further, but the cost is going to be much higher than onshore wind. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as well. So let me just focus on onshore a little further. This is what the outlook is for the US, and I would imagine that the same percentage of reduction is something that you could anticipate as well. The tower height is expected to go up to at least 130 meters by 2035. Your turbine capacity will reach on average 5.5 megawatt, and the rotor size is going to get close to 175 meters. Now with that, there's going to be a cost reduction is expected, which I will touch on it in the next slide. These are the projections for the US. In 2020, we are generating 110, we generated 110 gigawatts from land-based wind, 3 gigawatts from, that was a target, I don't believe we achieved that. And then the 16 gigawatt is the solar. And this number is supposed to increase over time. So by 2050, our goal is to have 35% of electricity generated from wind. So I mentioned at the beginning, we just went past 10%. So we got 25% more to go to reach that level of percentage of contribution from wind. The solar is expected to increase to 111 gigawatt as well by 2050. If the technology increases at the rate we are proposing to increase, it's expected that onshore wind will further come down in terms of cost by 27%, whereas the offshore is going to come down by 17 to 35%. 35% is for fixed base offshore systems, and 17 is if you choose to do floated system, which is something US is focusing on. So even with this price reduction, you would expect the onshore to be much cheaper than offshore. So if you're producing offshore at a higher price, consumers have to pay a higher price as well. So that's where the challenge will come in if you focus more so on offshore as opposed to onshore. So let me just take a quick look at why are we not building tall wind turbine towers. I think I've seen in some of your presentation, you have shown that wind turbine towers are built using tubular steel towers. Typically, they are made out of steel tubes, 3 segments gets added. They're made in factories and transported to the site. As you can see here, in the US, there's a vertical clearance height in highway systems. I don't know what's that number for Indonesia is, but that prevents transporting larger tubular towers to the site. I'm a structural engineer. We don't limit the building height or structural height based on how much we can transport under the system like that. So what we will be doing is we need to change the technology. This technology has matured. We won't be able to keep pushing it. So that's the space that I kind of work on. We have developed this technology called Hexcrete. This is a concrete base. Basically, what it does is uses concrete columns and panels. So you can see how we simplify the transportation so that we can assemble these cells on site, and uses a prefabricated post-tension technology, and it can connect that with steel or any other tower technology that exists today. So we are working on some demonstration project where we are aiming to show how this new technology can be used to go new heights. So if you look at, here's a simple demonstration. Typically, we will be building these cells on site, and then placing the cells on top of each other, and to whatever the desired height is, we would be able to have a Hexcrete component connected with steel, and then your turbine can go on the top. We have done designs for 120 meters, 140 meters, and 160 meter tall towers. They are almost twice as high as some of the wind turbine towers that you have seen today. With tall wind turbine towers, even in the wind-rich region, including Iowa, you could see, even though we are building a lot of wind turbines, they actually, most of them are in low wind conditions. What this tall towers can do, even in wind-rich region, is basically allows you to reach a higher wind conditions and make your systems more productive. And by doing that, you will find the system to be more efficient, and obviously your capacity factor will increase. We have done some simulations for companies interested in this in terms of showing how much more capacity they will receive. So these are all based on wind measurements up to 200 meters. So typically we would expect the capacity factors to increase by anywhere from 10 to 20%, even in rich regions. So is that a big number, 10 to 20%? I think if your numbers is going up by even 2% in the electricity market, that's a big number. So 10 to 20% is a huge benefit if you were to go to that number. So let me just quickly look at Indonesia and what I've observed. So this is, I spent very little time, but I just want you to be aware of some of the things that I observed. That Indonesia has published some information about wind speeds. They typically are shown in the 1.3 to 6.3 meter per second, which is kind of low for wind power production. So remember the 7 meter I mentioned before, that's a mark that you want to be able to exceed. How do you exceed that number? Obviously, you can use tall towers to do that. Typically, like what some of the southeastern states have done in the US, people have done studies in the past using anywhere from 60 to 80 meter hub height and made conclusions. And if that applies to you, you probably want to revisit the topic and look at 100 meters, 120 meters hub height, wind speed, and then revisit the potential areas, because your landscape will change for wind power generation. These are the areas shown as potential wind areas for Indonesia. But again, they're suggesting an average wind speed of 5 meters per second. That's not going to really give you a wind speed that particularly overseas companies are going to line up to come after, because that wind speed is considered to be low. This is suggested to be a potential, the wind potential for this particular areas. But since then, I have looked at some of the other maps, and again, this is showing wind speed at 50 meters. So you could see the offshore wind is much more in the 7-8 meter per second. But in this case, you're looking at a shallower tower. So obviously your offshore looks much better than onshore. But you could also look at onshore for tall wind tower as well, and then complement that with offshore generation. So here's what I've found. So you have very little amount of onshore wind right now. I think in 2021, the reported number is 154 megawatt. So I've seen 1 or 2 small wind farms. But I came across this particular study. This was done in 2022. It's a forum that got together and looked at wind potential for Indonesia. So what concerns me is that this is a recent study or recent summit that pulled together some information on wind. So they have certainly looked at much larger capacity onshore as well as offshore. So that's a 94 gigawatt offshore as well as 60 gigawatt of onshore potential for Indonesia. So you could see potential regions. So it should be in the, in this yellow region as well as in the red region. And so that's where your wind speed is getting up to even 6+. Even the yellow tend to be here. But again, I would emphasize that I think you should look at, if these are potential areas, you should look at what would be a tall tower will do. Because the tall tower is not only going to increase the, it's going to allow you to reach better wind condition, but it will also make the production more cost effective. So you gain wind speed, then you also create opportunities for companies to invest because they see potential to be profitable in generating wind. So given the interest of time, I'll stop here and make some concluding remarks here. So wind technologies have grown over the past 2 decades. So that includes, turbine size or blade sizes. The tower height has gone up, but a lot more improvements is needed for us to be able to improve. That's the space that we are working on. The Hexcrete technology that I briefly talked about has been developed, and we are working with some local companies to do a demonstration project. And I think for Indonesia, based on what I've listened and what I have been able to observe, you should certainly look at the feasibility of building wind power with consideration of new and future technologies rather than the past. And that should include the use of tall towers, because that will change your landscape and increase the viable regions for generating wind power as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. So I have 2 questions here for you.
Okay.
So the first question is, if we are thinking of building a wind farm for wind power, I think the first issue would be the infrastructure to support that wind farm. So because usually the wind farm is in the remote area, right? So would that initial cost be large enough to hinder the development of wind power in Indonesia, for example?
Yeah, it depends. I don't know the landscape in terms of population density versus so what I can say is that if I were to look at the US, how we have done is most of the interconnections are done with the existing infrastructure. So some of the new wind farms are done more or less because there's a trend in the US. If you look at companies like, so big companies like, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they also are now interested in generating or utilizing clean power. So, but their demanding is not only clean electricity, but they want the supply to be done using a new grid system for a number of reasons. And so unless you have that need, I think you certainly have to look at what is it you can do in interconnections with the existing system. So we have actually looked at Iowa as well as Southeast. Interconnection is possible, but you got to have the utility companies on board with you. But that would be a good starting point.
Yep. The second question is, we know that wind energy, we cannot produce 24 hours usually, right? So is it possible to do a hybrid energy from that wind farm? So instead of just building wind towers, we also have solar panels, for example. Have that been investigated?
Yes. So Iowa has been known for wind power. I mentioned that we generate 60% electricity, and our winter weathers are not great in terms of temperatures. But even then, now wind farm owners in Iowa realize that adding solar is actually complements the wind better. So each region's come up with some ratio to optimize their storage. Don't quote me on that. I believe for every 10 megawatts, they target 20% of equivalent solar for the new generation. And the opposite is true in the other part, whether you go to West Coast or the East Coast, where they build a lot of solar, and but then they add more wind turbine towers to complement. So if you look at the peak hours for wind, is actually typically in the nighttime, whereas solar peaks in the daytime, right? So so we are doing some studies where what we look at is the total demand. Demand is not constant. And then you look at your generation from different sources. So that's one of the concerns that I had when I saw, I think it's a Fabi presented, very heavy solar. Then you are going to be requiring a significant amount of storage. What you should be looking at is your total demand, the total load, and then look at how do you optimize so that your storage requirement become the minimum, right? So that's what we are looking at for some regions. So the answer is absolutely yes, but you also have to have the land and the space to be able to do that.
So how advanced is the storage development as of today? Is that the weakest link so far?
Well, the storage has been probably, if you now look at wind, solar, and storage has been more expensive. Its prices are coming down. But this is the point I want to make. Even a small amount of storage, if you have to bring in, that's an added cost. So let's say if you have wind and solar complement each other, you don't need storage. That's going to be cheaper than any time you bring in storage, because that's something new that you're adding to the capacity or to the system. So you want to optimize it so that you require a minimum amount of storage, because that will keep the cost of electricity lower.
Okay, thank you very much. So to end this, I would like to re-invite Dr. Nanzo into the discussion. If you have anything to ask to Dr. Sridharan, and Dr. Sridharan, if you have anything to ask to Dr. Cho. I don't know if Dr. Cho is still around.
Yes, yeah. I'm
So
still
I want to make it as a panel now between the speakers, so you can ask each other for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So and Dr. Suri, and it was a very informative and interesting presentation you gave. I think maybe my key question is really related to the challenges that California is facing. For example, assuming like even Indonesia, where it has abundant renewable energy resources and solar and the wind, and it could potentially produce excessive power and during the day. And I understand like there's also evening, but the total demand for battery storage technologies for the entire country decarbonization may be very astonishing, the requirement. So yeah, I wonder, and what do you think of that? And also the other challenge is more related to industry and use. And obviously some of the renewable generated electricity could be and used to electrify and supply the electrified end users in the industrial sector, particularly for the low temperature heat. But there are also a little bit relatively higher heat requirement, and that will be very difficult for electricity to supply. And so what do you think of the other, for example, solar thermal and technology applications in those situations? Yeah, it's just some quick question to what you talked about.
Yeah, so as I said, I think I tend to look back at how we evolve over time rather than I mean that's my space, right? I'm not looking at how things evolve. I'm not an expert on that, but when I look back at how companies have changing strategies, I think it's pretty obvious that just one source of generation is causing challenges. So I don't know if you attended the Clean Power conference last week in New Orleans. I was there. There was some presentation focused on this solar generation. So they targeted some regions. So California was one. Texas was the other that they looked at. They have concerns in these studies. So these are studies individuals have done, where they're saying that the amount of curtailment that solar farm has to do is going to get more and more significant based on the projection. So unless the electricity is taken away by, for electrifying vehicles and things like, if we can come up with the strategy. So right now, one of the presentation focused on showing how much we are increasing the curtailment over time. So the same thing happened for wind in Iowa up until recent years. So what has changed in the recent years is we did add solar and we did add storage. So that has helped them, but they still have a challenge. So for those who are listening in, the curtailment typically, basically the utility company will ask you to shut down the system or not produce or sell the energy at a negative cost. So none of these is going to be exciting for a wind farm owner or solar farm owner. So that's a danger in doing just relying only on one source because of the ups and downs. So I think we should strategically look at how do you make sure that the load is looked at. I think there are some studies that have looked at it, and we are doing some simulations for some southeast states that we are studying right now, where you can get a feel for what the total load is and come up with how do you optimize the storage capacity. So the goal would be to make the storage capacity low. And then I think you're familiar with the electrification part of it. We didn't include that because that's not as part of the current load in the information that we are dealing with. But if somebody has the ability to simulate that information, that would be a useful information include as well. I think that needs to be continued to be evaluated over time as the more vehicles come online and as you add more capacity. And California is going very significantly more on offshore. I think I've seen numbers like, they're targeting 25 gigawatt. Again, the cost is going to be so high that they will have to rethink at some point. It sounds very good in terms of policy side, I think, today. But look at what has happened to Europe, where they put in like $800 billion, now saying that they can't sustain that cost because government subsidy disappears and public has to pay for that electricity cost. So I know we heard about, you touched on this, decarbonization and climate issues, and everything is fair, but public won't step up and pay more for it if you say, okay, we're going to go this route, but you have to pay twice as much as you used to pay.
So Dr. Cho, do you have any response to that? And that would probably be the end of our discussion.
Yes, so yeah, that's a really good point you raised about the load. Certainly the EV is a very interesting for the overall integration to serve the multiple purposes, but the really building side of solutions. And then as one of the strategies in California to cope with this excessive renewable supply and also the duck curve, it is on the demand response. And there are programs and incentivizing and providing, for example, discounted price for smart meters. For example, the summer cooling could be really reduced and or shift into the different hour. There's could be pre-cooling solutions when the electricity price is low and there's not much demand. Yes, so along with the battery and the storage technologies and other measures, the demand response, the flexible load, and is increasingly and a very important topic and in California. And I assume it probably will be the case for Indonesia as well, because a lot of your new power capacity is there to meet the peak load, right? Not necessarily for the entire electricity generation. So that's the case. It may be cheaper, lower cost, and to simply reduce the peak load and through efficiency, energy management. I was in Jakarta in February in a large modern hotel for conferences, and then I think the room is overcooled, and the conference was very much overcooled. It could be increased by at least 3 or 4 degrees C, right? That's a lot of energy saving right there. And then also the glass, the windows are single pane. They don't even have like the low E glass. And so there's simple measures like those retrofits with film. It could be much lower cost and compared with other supply side solutions. So I think I'm not saying one is there to replace the other. We need all. We need all of
Agree.
them.
Yeah. Somebody has raised a hand, Hart. I don't know, you may want to ask.
Okay, that would be the last question, hopefully. So, Hedy, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, good morning to all of you, to all of the speakers. So I have a question for you guys. Nowadays, a lot of people in the world is focusing to explore the fossil fuel. And you can see now that since this seminar is discussing about the transition of using the renewable energy, so is there any temptation or is there any effort from you guys to slow down the exploration of fossil fuel that can jeopardize the people around the world? It seems to me that every company, like oil and gas company, is competing each other to produce more fossil fuel compared to the renewable energy. Is there any effort from you guys as researchers, as the speaker in this case, to reduce or to calm down the production of the fossil fuel? It is dangerous for us. As you can see that the climate, the temperature, the world temperature, the Earth temperature should be 1.5 degrees. And as you can see also on the SDGs of the United Nations, is emphasizing to us to provide more energy, which is affordable, cheaper to all of the people, and no one is being left. But a lot of people are being left now. So
I think we got the point. So I would ask the speakers to give 1 minute response each, so then we can wrap this up.
Yeah, I think I can start if that's okay.
Yes.
Quickly, I think that is certainly and totally I can relate and agree with you, the sense of urgency, the need to really stop all fossil fuels. At the same time, because the scale of the problem we have today, and also because of the speed, we've been able to install renewables and manufacturing all of those. I think it's right now very challenging for renewable energy to replace all the fossil fuels we are using today. And then to quickly shift to electrification, all of those requires electricity and the running processes, and that's not, people are not used to do, and then that's very costly, particularly for industrial processing. So that's probably why, and globally, there are still companies and producing those because there's demand. And so it's just this does not represent our lab's perspective. I think near term, coal should really be phased out. And we do have lower carbon and emission fuels like gas and natural gas and others. And as a more like a transition fuel, at the same time, really speed up the renewable and penetration. And but yes, I do agree with you. And there could be these phased approach, and toward just reiterate, this is a really daunting problem we have today. We basically use and fossil fuels are low cost, cheap. You just need to dig out of the ground, right? And they're high energy density. All the other options we have, they're a lot lower energy density and requires other energy to also make it. Yeah, so I just want to quickly and respond.
1 minute closing statement from you, Dr. Sridharan.
Yeah, I'll briefly say that I mean, this is what I keep emphasizing, right? So the green electricity is good, but it has to be cost competitive. If the cost is high, then obviously there are companies going to continue to promote fossil fuel if it's a cheaper alternative. And then they also have to pay, so some policy has to come into play because for the carbon they generate, they may have to pay more money. And then while the green power has to be more cost competitive. So the market has to be driven towards cost competitive solution. You can't just say, okay, we're going to shift everything, but it's going to cost more. Some countries people can afford, some countries people can't afford. So that we don't want to take eye out of the cost issue seriously, because that's what drives everything.
Okay, thank you very much. So that is wrapping up our discussion here today. It's been almost 3 hours, 3 productive hours. So hopefully this is something good for Indonesia and for our future of energy. So for those of you who are still here and who have not filled out the attendance form is in the chat box, so please do so. And if you are an engineer, Indonesian engineer in the US, I also invite you to join the US chapter of PII. So with that, I would like to thank all the speakers and all of the attendants in this webinar, and I hope to see you in the future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.